Hi sewing friends, my name's Karina. You might have seen me around YouTube on my own sewing YouTube channel called Lifting Pins and Needles. I am visiting here today at the Wardrobe by Me YouTube channel, and the pattern I've chosen to feature is the Grace dress and tunic, and I'm here to share with you a lot of the sewing aspects of this beautiful pattern. If you have not seen it, you are missing out. It's one of the most beautiful patterns in the catalog, in my opinion. I will put up a diagram so you can see all the options. You can see that the options are really diverse. This can be a pattern that will take you through the whole year, autumn, winter, spring, summer, the works, because there are lots of options here that will make this pattern super versatile for you. The common features is that there's a bodice and there's a skirt. That skirt could either be gathered onto the bodice and be long and flowy. You can add a ruffle at the hem, or you can choose a smaller, shorter with a curved hem piece that will make your Grace a tunic, not a dress. There's a casing and a drawstring. At the top here, all the views have gathers here on the neckline, and to finish the raw edges of the neckline, you have three options. You can do a collar band, finish it with bias binding, and the third one has a bit of bias binding inside the collar. So I think that's really interesting. There is a little V at the front finished with bias binding. The sleeves, lots of options there too. You can make it sleeveless. You can make it sort of elbow length. It's a regular sleeve with a ruffle at the bottom. Or you can sew a really classic long sleeve, has gathers here on the sleeve cap, and at the wrist you have a sleeve that is gathered onto a cuff, and you have a little slit that is finished with bias binding. It's really classic features. And to sew your Grace dress or tunic, you can use so many woven fabrics. I've got some here on the screen so you can see. I'm sure you have something suitable in your stash. Just remember that if you're choosing features like ruffles on the sleeve or on the bottom of your dress, if you choose a lightweight woven that doesn't have that much drape, all these features will just be a little bit more voluminous than if you choose something with a little bit more drape. So have a think about that. I think with a tunic, you have a lot more choice because you don't need any of these aspects to drape or anything. You could use linen, cotton lawn, double gauze, you can choose so many fabrics for that. So have a look. I'm sure you have something special to make your Grace dress and tunic. The pattern is available from sizes 0 to 24 US, and in European that is equivalent to 32 to 54. It's a style that has a nice amount of ease, around 5.5 inches of positive ease at the bust, 11 inches at the waist when it's stretched, without your drawstring. If you're making your tunic, it's a little bit more slim fit than if you're making the dress, because the dress is gathered, you have much more ease there. You have detailed body measurements and finished garment measurements to help you choose your size. Now what we're here is for the sewing, right? So there is a lot that you'll see in today's video. You'll see an overview of all the pattern pieces, how to sew the little V on the front with the binding, how to put the neckline together before putting on the collar, how to sew the yoke in 2 layers with the burrito method. And I've chosen to feature the long sleeve because it has the most interesting features that you might be shying away from. Make it more accessible when you see it in video format. So you'll see how to put the long sleeve together with the gathers here, how to set it in, and most importantly, how to finish all the details here on the wrist, the gathered sleeve that goes onto a cuff, and the slit with a bound placket there. Those are all sewing aspects that you'll be able to see next. Let's hop into all the sewing. I'm using a blue crepe fabric to make a Grace tunic. This is the back, this is the front bodice. They are both cut on the fold right there. You need 2 yoke pieces because the back will be finished sandwiched between there, as well as the shoulder seams there, so you have really nice finish inside. The front has a little V, so it's on the fold from here down. Up there you can see the slant of the V. There is a piece cut on the bias that will finish that little V. That one has already been pressed and prepared. I've chosen to do the collar version to finish the neckline. You can also finish the neckline with bias tape, so it will be the same as this but just way longer. I have a long sleeve. The sleeve cap will have some gathering there. That's really pretty. There's 4 cuff pieces, 2 pairs, 1 for each sleeve, of course. It looks lighter blue there because it's already been interfaced. I blocked fused that, so that's ready to go. And that little yellow line, you can see there is a little slit that will be bound with these little pieces of bias tape. There will be some slight gathering at the bottom of the sleeve that will be sewn into the cuff. My 2 collar band pieces are also interfaced, both of them. I also blocked fused those. And moving the angle a little bit, this is going to be the skirt piece. There's 2 of those. This is what is going to be sewn onto the bodice. There will be a waist seam with a casing, and these pieces that you see there are just very long pieces that are going to be the drawstring. If you're making the dress, the only difference is that instead of this different skirt piece for the tunic, which is narrower, you just have a much wider skirt piece that will be gathered onto the bottom of the bodice. In this case, there won't be any gathers when you sew this to that. It'll be 1-to-1, and you'll bring it in at the waist with the drawstring there. These are the pattern pieces for my grace dress. There are less pattern pieces here because I've chosen to make the sleeveless view. This is the back, this is the front. They are both cut on the fold. The front is cut on the fold up to a certain point, and then it's cut open there. There is a little V right there cut out that you can see. There is a little piece of binding that will finish that little V. There are my double yoke pieces. These are my collar pieces. There's 2 of them. They are both interfaced and have been block fused. You can also finish the neckline with bias tape, so it's just like that piece but a lot longer, and that's what you put around the neckline. On the front here, there is a little section that's gathered. You'll find 2 notches there, so that's why that looks a little wider. Over here are my skirt pieces. There are different lengths, and you can do tiers like another ruffle down there, but I'm just doing a simple skirt. The skirt there is wider than the bodice is going to be, so the skirt is going to be gathered onto the bodice with 1-inch seam allowance there that will form the casing where the drawstring will go onto. These are extra steps that are going to help you put your garment together later, so I like to do them at an earlier stage while I'm getting everything prepared. I have my cuff pieces there. I have 2 pairs. It doesn't matter which side you choose, just choose one of these and do a guide stitch at 3/8 seam allowance from the edge. It's really easy to get an accurate seam allowance using the metal plate underneath your needle. So that's nice. It's a long stitch length. This can come flying right off after pressing that, and you've created a memory crease that's going to make putting the cuffs on so much easier. Now in this pattern, both layers are interfaced. For the collar pieces, the same. I've done a guide stitch at 3/8 right there. I've pressed it up and it's ready to go for later. Both of my collar pieces are interfaced. This is the front pattern piece. Here is a little V in the center. Now I've done some preparation beforehand and done some stay stitching and some gathering stitches. Along the neckline here, you'll find 2 notches. From here to there, I've done a long stitch length, 5.0, and that's what I'm going to use to gather this into the collar later. Same as on this side. But from this notch up to there, I did do a stay stitch with a regular stitch length just to make sure that area stays the same length and doesn't stretch out. You know, there's a little bit of bias cut right there. So I did that as a precaution. And along this little V, I also have some stay stitching just to stabilize it, especially here in this point there. Now we have this little piece that was cut on the bias. It is a pattern piece. Now you can fold this manually. You can fold this in half and press it, and then press one in and then press the other. I find that I burn my fingers a lot, and this bias tape maker has an 18 on the back, will fit this piece perfectly. So when you put this through the bias tape maker, you will get this fold on both sides, and it just saves you time and it saves your fingers. This is the piece that's going to be used to finish this little V right here. I've got the wrong side of the fabric here. I've put a pin to mark the center. This little V would extend, make it as extended as you can. And this is where I like sewing the binding on the wrong side of the garment. I would be sewing it on the fold right there and then flipping this over towards the right side and then top stitching. This little piece of bias tape is a little longer than the neckline, and that is absolutely fine. You can trim away the excess once this is done. Okay, so this is what I'm going to sew now with a straight stitch. When you get to this middle area, just look underneath that you're not getting a little pucker right there. Okay, that middle section is fine. There's no pucker over here. Now I'm looking at the right side of the fabric and I have my bias tape looking like this. Now I'm going to bring the fold over to cover that seam, and this is how now it's going to be top stitched and it's going to be super neat. Now I'm not going to rely on pins for this. This fabric is a little bit slippery, so I'm going to give it a quick hand baste first before top stitching. That is completely optional, but I always think a little hand basting does wonders for how the final product is going to look. Here it is. Now I'm going to sew it on the edge, and to help this process be super neat, I have a blind hem foot with the needle to the left, and that helps you edge stitch really accurately. It makes a huge difference to how neat this looks, so if you don't have this presser foot, I recommend. Otherwise, you can just do it with a regular presser foot. That's how that looks. It's still extended. This is the right side of the fabric. Now we are going to fold these right sides together there, meet the raw edges there at the top of the neckline. We'll cut that off in a little bit, and now you need to find the center, and this is where now we need to do a tiny diagonal stitch, and that will form the V on the front. Now because it's so tiny, and for the sake of accuracy, I prefer to do this little stitch by hand. I just think it's much easier to see and manipulate, to do about 3 stitches that way than trying to be accurate there with a sewing machine. That's my hand sewing there, just a few stitches, and then from this side, this is how the V is going to look. It looks really nice. No one will know it's been done by hand. Now we can work on putting the yoke piece together, enclosing the seams and doing the burrito roll. We will return to this gathering bit later when we sew on the collar to the neckline. To show you how to enclose the back seam and the shoulder seams within these 2 layers of the yoke pieces, I've switched to this other fabric. I'm making a dress with this fabric, and in this case you can clearly see what is the right and the wrong side of the fabric, in contrast to my other blue fabric, which is basically the same on the right and the wrong. So I think it's easier for you to see how to do it here. Take both of your yoke pieces and just put them right sides together. Take this top layer that you have and just roll it into the center so that you have these areas exposed. And now your front piece has been done. The little V neckline has been done. You've seen how to do that with the blue version. And just align these here right sides together with that layer that you have right there that's exposed. Now take this one and roll it out again, match these up. Now you're going to have 3 layers here to sew with a straight stitch 3/8 seam allowance. If you take the front piece and just pull it in, you'll see that your both yoke pieces are right sides together and they are sandwiching the front right there. So let's go ahead and sew those. Before sewing these, let me mention one thing. We have necklines here on both these yoke pieces, and I have stay stitched these also to prevent them from stretching out. You know, there's quite a lot of manipulation going on, and you'll need to conserve this shape and size for the collar to fit on here later. So make sure you've stay stitched these in your preparation stages. These are just 2 little short seams, 3/8 seam allowance, and we are going through 3 layers here. Okay, so that's ready. That seam has been sewn. If I extend these like that, you'll see that it'll be neat on the inside and on the outside. You don't need to finish or serge these edges right there. Now, between these 2 layers, we need to enclose the back piece, right? So just put your garment like this. The front is over there. This is the yoke. You've got fabric right sides up. This is the top of the back piece. You'll have 2 notches on each side where you would have done some gathering stitches. I've done a double row just to make gathering easier, but you can also do a simple row. This area will be gathered in to fit the notches that you have here on your yoke piece. So you have 2 notches right there. At the end, this will be gathered in the center and this will fit. Now take this top layer that you have from your yoke. This is the one that needs to be sewn right sides together with the back right here. So just push the bottom layer of your yoke aside, hold this one, don't let it go, and just flip this forward so that you have these 2 right sides together. Now I'm going to turn this like that, so I have the back piece on top and the yoke on the bottom, just so I can work on this gathering. Okay, I've got the back piece and the yoke piece under there, right sides together, and look, you can see how much excess there is in the back piece that needs to be gathered into that small space there. There is a notch here and a notch on the yoke, so that is what needs to be gathered. So just pull your thread to match the length right there. It's not a large area, it's just in the center back. We are going to sew this first seam just with a basting stitch. Use a longer stitch length, it's not a definite stitch, and it needs to be sewn smaller than 3/8 seam allowance. You want to sew with the gathers on top so you can see what you're doing. Okay, that's the seam we have just done. Extend your 2 yoke pieces there. We still have a raw edge there that needs to be sewn here, but first we need to roll everything up. So let's scoot this up a little bit. Take all of this, the front and the back, and just roll it up like this. Hold it there. Now that you've got that rolled up, just hold this all up, flick this over like this. Take this and meet that seam right there with all that roll inside. This is now what we need to sew, and this will be the definite stitch at 3/8 seam allowance with a regular stitch length, and this is going to enclose the back seam. You basically have 2 yokes sandwiching the back with the gathers in the middle right there. So I'll do this roll again so you can see. Lay your garment like this. Up here you have the raw edge of the yoke piece. It hasn't been sewn onto anything, and this is the seam that we've just done. Scoot this up. Take all of this, the front and the back, and just roll it all up. Hold this and then just flip this like this forward. Then you have this raw edge over here, and you're going to wrap it all around. So I'll just put some pins and sew it together. This is the roll inside. Okay, this will be the definite stitch, 3/8 seam allowance. The basting stitch that was done previously won't be seen because it was done with a smaller seam allowance. So just shorten your stitch length, and it's just a long seam. Here in the center area is where you have all the gathers in there. You can see them right there. Okay, there we go. Now we need to turn this right sides out, and it would be easier to just put your hand in the neckline and do it through there. But I would like to manipulate the neckline as least possible. I don't want to be stretching anything out there. So you can just do this from any of the sides. So just put your hand in from the side and just gently pull your garment out of here. It'll fit and it'll come right out. Okay, so this is the wrong side of the garment. The inside has the yoke, has the right side of the fabric, so it looks really pretty. The back has the gathers coming right out of it, enclosed, and the seam is also enclosed very neatly. When you flip this to the right side, it's the same, very neat there, gathers there. Now you might have some gathering stitches there that you might need to remove. That's why that was done with a long stitch length, so that's easy to pull out. We'll give this a really nice press and tidy up. And now we will be ready to sew on the collar piece. Remember, there is an area here in the front that will be gathered, but I will continue the rest with the blue top. I think you can see that easier with a solid than with this print right here. Here are the 2 collar pieces. They are both interfaced. One of them has already got the memory crease. This was done way earlier on in the process. Let's put this one aside for now. Let's take this regular one now, and at the bottom you'll see there are some notches. You'll see quite a few, and it's going to be super helpful for putting all of this together to the neckline. So you just saw the yoke being sandwiched with a burrito roll with my other fabric. It was just easier to see than this one, but I have gone ahead and finished this. Now we have this excess of tape here at the top. We can just safely trim this away now. And this part of the neckline is the area that has to be gathered in. So it's going to be a little different than how you sew other collars. So when you sew a collar to a neckline that doesn't have any gathers or anything, you would place this right sides together, and then you would sew it on, usually with the collar piece on top and the neckline on the bottom. Now in this case, because there are going to be quite a bit of gathers on the neckline, this collar is going to be sewn the other way. Just when you're putting it together, the gathers are going to be on the top, the neckline, and the collar is going to be on the bottom. So remember, I'm working with the collar at the bottom. I'm going to just pin the other extreme of this collar to the other side over here. Make sure 3/8 of an inch are hanging off like that. That is the seam allowance. There is that little white notch there that is going to match the one on the back. I call them notches, but I don't actually notch into the fabric, I just mark it. Next, I'm going to match the center back of the collar piece to the center back of the neckline. We have 2 layers of neckline here because we have 2 yoke pieces. I've just put a pin to mark the center back, and I'm going to match it here. Okay, along the neckline you have that notch, and that's where the gathering stitch started up to that other one over there. So this one will have a notch to match on the collar as well, right there. From the center back to that notch there, It's going to match perfectly one on one. And then you see how the neckline has all that excess that needs to be gathered in. And that's why it's easier to sew this neckline with the collar underneath so that you can really control and see what's going on here with the gathers. I'll go ahead and find that on the other side. Here is the notch, that's where the gathering is going to start. And here is the one on the collar right behind. Okay, so I'll just take my time to pin everything and then make sure to gather in that area of the neckline to be the same length as what's on the back, the collar, and then we'll sew this on with 3/8 seam allowance. Okay, here we have everything pinned. Remember, the collar is going to be on the inside and the neckline on the outside. Here's the gathered area here on the front, and everything matches perfectly. Remember, you have 3/8 of an inch of the collar piece protruding from there, that is the seam allowance. And now we're going to just go ahead and sew this with 3/8. This has been sewn. What needs to happen now is that you need to go to the iron and press the seam up towards where the collar is. This is the right side of your garment, and that's how it's going to look. I'll also do a few snips because this area is quite curved, so a few snips always help. Even in the area where it's gathered, I'll just do a few little snips. Okay, so we head to the iron and press the seam up like that. Okay, so we have the garment right sides out. We have one of the collar pieces already on. This is going to be the one that's visible on the outside. Seam has been pressed up neatly. And now we need to take our second collar, the one that had the memory crease at the bottom, and just align it to these other collar right sides together. So we will basically need to sew from that crease all along the curve and all the way around the neckline. Okay, both collar pieces are right sides together. Here is the one that has the fold, and I have aligned them here on the center. Remember, we had a little bit protruding, so both layers will have that fold there. This one is because the seam has been done already, and the one on the back is the fold that we pressed earlier on. And just to make things easier, I did draw the seam allowance where I'm going to sew right there. I think it's easier to draw it on so you can really do it neatly and not just eyeball that little curve. And then it's pinned all across until the other side where I have also drawn the seam allowance. When I get to this, I'll be careful to sew right there on the edge. And on the curved areas, just go slow. This has been sewn. I'm going to cut away some of the seam allowance just to reduce the bulk right there. And now before I flip this over, just on this curved area, I want to cut out some notches, just little triangles to reduce the bulk here of the seam allowance when it's on the inside. So like that, and I'll do the same over here on this other curve. Take away a little bit of seam allowance there. Okay, what we need to do now is press this seam open, go to the iron and press it open, and then we can flip this collar to the inside like this. We had already pressed this other seam, and so this one's just going to meet that one, and on the outside the collar is going to look very neat. So I'll go ahead to the iron, press this long seam on the top open so it's nice and neat, flip the collar to the inside, and then before top stitching I really want to do some hand basting here just to make sure it's going to be super neat. And then we can top stitch all the collar all the way around. This is the right side of the garment, and I've hand basted the collar down. So on the inside is where it was loose. That was the seam that had been pressed previously. So everything's looking super neat. And now all we need to do is sew on the edge. I'm going to start somewhere on the back, right here on the top, and then go around the curve, pivot there, and then go along the bottom or around this collar. To make this easier, I use a blind hem presser foot, has a G on it, and I move the needle to the left so it sews into that opening, and then this guides along the edge, gives you a really nice neat straight stitch without doing much effort at all. It's looking very neat. The hand basting definitely helped. Nice and neat on the top. This is one of the sleeves. If you look up here, you'll see a double notch. That means that this is the back part of the sleeve. So if you carry your eye down to the bottom, you'll see a little line, and that's where the slit is going to be. And that's where we're going to work now to do the binding right there. You can see my slit marked in yellow. Now what I did as an extra step was to do some stay stitching right around it up to the tip on the top. It'll just stabilize it before I cut into this. And the way that we are going to bind this is very, very similar to what we did in the little V on the top in the neckline. So it'll be basically the same technique. Now that I've cut into there, I can extend this just like we did with that little V on the top and apply the binding. I had already prepared my binding pieces. I'm going to mark with a pin where the center of that binding is. And as the same way I did with the other one, I'm going to work from the wrong side of the garment, this side, and put my binding right there in that center. Now in this case, I'm going to have the sleeve on the top and the binding on the bottom because I really want to make sure that there isn't a pleat forming here in this little area. And then this would just be one seam. The only delicate area is this little bit right there. And then we're going to flip it to the right side and top stitch it. Basically the same thing we did with the little V binding on the top, only this is done on the sleeve at the bottom. This is a technique that when you see it completed, you think it's really, really hard. Then once you actually do it, you find out it's not too bad at all. So this will be sewn with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, very small seam allowance. Okay, once that's sewn, then this comes over to the front like this and then gets top stitched. I'm going to hand baste this and then top stitch it down. Okay, so this is the right side of the blouse. Here is where the slit was bound. And now just trim away this excess that we have on the bottoms. And now in the same way that I finished the little V on the neckline, we just have to fold these right sides together like that. Align the raw edges, find the center right here. And here is where we do a little diagonal stitch. Again, because it's such a tiny area and I know it'll be just faster and more precise, I'm just going to do that by hand. There is a little diagonal stitch I've done by hand. Now lay your sleeve down with the right sides of the fabric up. This is the back. Under there you'll see the double notch. Follow this area down. So this is the short section. The binding will stay like it is, and now this one will naturally just fold over it. So on this side it will be folded inside. This is how an overlap is going to happen right there. This hasn't been pressed or neatened up, so that's why it looks a little bit puckered. That's fine. Once you press it and steam it, it will be fine. And now we are ready to do some gathers and sew on our cuffs. I'm just going to put a pin there so that stays like that. Now when you flip this and look at the wrong side, you will have 2 marks there. This is the area now that needs some gathering. So I'll just do a long stitch length there, 2 rows. And later on, when I'm going to put the cuff, this will be gathered in and it will reduce the circumference down here. So I'll do the first row at about 1/4 inch and the second row at 1/2 inch. That means that when the cuff is sewn at 3/8, the gathering will be on either sides of the seam allowance. After doing the gathering stitches here, now we can sew this long seam of the sleeve. Just put it right sides together, go ahead and sew it and serge it at 3/8. Once I'm done with that, I'll be back to put on the cuff here at the bottom. Okay, here we have the seam sewn and serged. I'm going to press the seam of the sleeve towards the front. So if you look up here, you'll see the single notch there. So that's the front of the sleeve, that's where I'm going to press it. The side seam of the tunic will be to the back, and so when this is sewn onto the armhole, I'll have opposing directions there on the side seam. It'll be less bulky. That's why I like doing it like that. So what I've got here, I have the sleeve with the wrong sides out. You can see the seams. And I have placed the cuff that doesn't have the fold already, just the normal cuff inside. These are right sides together. And in the same way that we put on the collar, there is 3/8 protruding from there and 3/8 protruding from there. Now you see that notch there matches the one on the back, same as here. And this is the area that was gathered in to meet the cuff like that. You can see the double row of gathering stitches, and the seam allowance is 3/8, will land about in the middle right there. And this is 3/8 seam allowance. this bottom gathering stitch can be removed. These are sewn with a long stitch length. It's a matter of pulling it and it will come right off. You can remove the top gathering stitch as well. They don't really need to be there anymore. Now we go to the iron and we press the seam allowance towards the cuff. Okay, this is how this looks on the inside. Remember, this short section of the sleeve had the binding normal, but then this other one had the binding folded. So it was sewn onto the cuff in the exact same way. That's how it's going to look from the inside once it's pressed. The seam allowance has been pressed up. Now we're going to take our second cuff, the one that has the fold already done, and we're just going to place it right sides together here. Align the folds right there. And this is similar to how we sewed the collar, only these are cuffs, but you can see the concepts are very similar. So we're going to sew that curved area across the top and then down this other side. This is the seam, it's curved, goes across and then goes down the bottom, and you're careful to sew right there on the edge. I'm going to set the needle right on the edge of that seam there and follow the curve. I have also drawn my seam allowance there, so it's easier for me to keep track of that. And when I sew, I'm going to be sewing right there on the edge. Here on this curve, I'm just going to make the seam allowance a little bit smaller and cut out some triangle notches there. That's one side, and I'll just repeat here on the other side. After doing that, we need to go to the iron and press this seam, straight seam on the top as much as you can. Just press it open until you can't, because the curve starts, and then we're going to flip this cuff over, and this is going to be the inside of the blouse. So the outside, it has already got the seam, and the cuff will be folded to the inside, and then we're going to baste that and sew it. Okay, there is the cuff, flip to the inside, everything nice and neat. I have hand basted that down so I don't have to deal with pins. And now we are going to sew this from the right side of the sleeve. I'm going to start somewhere down there using the same presser foot I used for the collar to help me sew on the edge. Go around all the way across and finish this cuff. Okay, the cuff is top stitched very neatly. This is the right side of the sleeve. You can see this is going to overlap like this. So this is the side that has the binding that's folded in. That's the one that's going to be on top of the other one. And right in the middle there, we're going to do a horizontal buttonhole and then sew on a button, and that will finish the bottom of the sleeve. We'll start beyond that seam allowance so it doesn't get bulky, and it'll be right there. Here we have the wrong side of the tunic. Here is the side seam. This is the front. You can see the collar there and the gathers. And along this armhole, you see several notches. This is a single one that will match the sleeve. Up higher, you'll see one there. You'll see two on this yoke piece right here. And then further on the back, you'll see the double notch. Now we take the sleeve. The sleeve has been turned right sides out, as you can see. And on the sleeve, you will also see a number of notches, a single one, the double notch at the back. Along the top, you have the gathering stitches. This was done early on between these two notches. Let's just slide the sleeve inside and start matching up our reference points. This is where my side seam is pressed towards the back and the sleeve is pressed towards the front. I did that intentionally to have opposing directions here, and it's much more comfortable. I'm going to be pinning everything from the inside. Take my time and pin. When I've got it all pinned, I'll show you where the gathers are going to happen on the sleeve. Okay, here we have the sleeve inside the armhole. I've pinned it from the inside. But let's look at the notches. There is a single notch from the armhole. There is a single notch on the sleeve. Along the bottom curve, you'll find the double notch of the armhole and the double notch of the sleeve. Going up further, you'll find the next notch on the armhole is around the middle of the yoke. That will match where the gathering will start on the sleeve cap. And then you have another notch in the middle of the sleeve, matching that also inside the yoke area. You can see two little sections right there. And then we have the other one matching this section. So we have all this area here that needs to be gathered in to match the length of the armhole at the back. I'm going to pull on these threads and gather it, and then we can just sew this on. I'm going to be sewing it with the sleeve inside so that the gathers are on top and I can see what I'm doing with the gathers there. So this is actually a very easy sleeve to set in because you don't need to ease anything in. You are supposed to have gathers here, so that just makes it easier. I like gathering in two sections if I can, from the extremes up to the center where I have that pin. Okay, there we go. That'll be all gathered up on the top of the sleeve only. And now we can sew this on the round and then serge it, and that's the sleeve done. I'll repeat here. I have the sleeve inside, I have the armhole on the bottom, which means the feed dogs are touching the armhole and the presser foot is touching the sleeve. That's so I can manage the gathers there on the top of the sleeve. Seam allowance is 3/8 like everywhere else. Okay, that's one of the sleeves sewn in, no drama there. And then on the outside, it's going to look like that. I think it's going to look really pretty. The gathers aren't excessive either. They're just on the section here on the yoke, on the top of your shoulder. You noticed that when I was showing you the burrito method, the yoke, I chose to film aspects of that with my dress that had a print and a more clear difference between the right and the wrong side of the fabric. I thought that was more helpful for you visually than sewing it with my blue top. That blue crepe is the same, the right and the wrong, so I think that would have been a bit more confusing for you. I will put up some images of both of my garments, my blue tunic. My bright tropical dress is made from a rayon linen blend. It's a rayon 70%, 30% linen blend. Perfect for a project like this, super flowy, feels amazing on. If you want to see more about my completed makes, see them on my full pattern review and a few more details of the sewing, like uniting the bodice to the skirt and the drawstring, head over to my channel at Lifting Pins and Needles, where I also have a video about the Grace dress and tunic as part of this collaboration. And I really hope I motivated you to have a look at the Grace dress and tunic. It's a wonderful pattern, beautiful, lovely details, and you can follow along and sew and be able to make yourself your beautiful garment as well. See you soon and happy sewing.